Hello and welcome to PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale History, where today we'll be looking at our first DLC character, Emmett Graves of Starhawk. But before we talk about him, let's turn back the clock to 1995 and the original release of the PlayStation. One little known title released at the time is a game called Warhawk, which was a flight combat game with futuristic planes that acted as a sort of counterpart to the Twisted Metal titles. It was largely forgotten until the release of the PS3, when the game was remade as a multiplayer combat game under the same name, only now with the ability to control tanks and individual soldiers in a perpetual war. It was a minor cult hit, but it was also largely forgotten. But in 2012 the developers decided to give it another go and move the action into space, and that's where Starhawk comes in. Blending third-person shooters, vehicle sims and real-time strategy into a single game, Starhawk not only followed in the multiplayer shoes of its predecessor, but it added a single-player campaign to the mix as well. And that's where we introduce Emmett Graves, the star of this campaign. He worked as a mercenary, defending mining operations on the planet Dust from creatures known as scabs. Scabs were actually humans mutated by overexposure to rift energy, the very same mystical stuff that the mining crews are after. Basically, this stuff is incredibly powerful, but has to be harnessed just right so that anyone working on the extractors doesn't turn into a beast. Emmett was also infected with the rift energy, but due to the efforts of his tech friend Sydney Cutter, he had learnt to control the energy, which he mostly used to cool down buildings from the sky, as he jetted around Dust, shooting up any scabs trying to interfere with the energy gathering. It was a rather simplistic plot, and Emmett was a rather simple character, since the single player essentially acted as training for the multiplayer more than anything else. The game didn't do fantastically well when it was released, but Sony felt it was worth representing with Emmett's inclusion in PlayStation All-Stars all the same. So let's take a look at what he can do. In a few of Starhawk's single-player missions, Emmett would be sent down to the location in a drop pod. This was basically a small shuttle pod that could hold a single person that was launched from a spaceship, allowing easy entry onto the surface of a planet. Once it hit the ground, it would burst open, leaving Emmett free to walk about. It's also one of the ways that he will enter the battle in PlayStation All-Stars, dropping in via a pod and breaking out of it before starting to fight. But how does he fight? Starhawk was primarily a third-person shooter, so that means guns. Lots of guns. By default, Emmett carried two weapons, a small handgun called the Galloway Revolver, which was basically a fancy space six-shooter, and an assault weapon called the Kinetic Rifle. Both of these weapons were available from the start of the game and pretty much stayed a permanent fixture in Emmett's arsenal. The revolver was a very weak weapon and pretty much existed as a backup if you ran out of ammo for other weapons. It fired fairly slowly, so it wasn't really ideal in any way. That said, it was a major part of Emmett's character since it allowed him to be represented as a space cowboy with his sidearm. The revolver therefore became part of his PlayStation All-Stars moveset. It actually takes up 3 moves, firing forward, firing down and firing up, and also the air variations of the same. It's not the only weapon in the game to do this, as you will see in the course of this video. The Kinetic Rifle was a much better weapon and was largely the default weapon for much of the game. It had great range, had reasonable power and was rapid fire, which was usually pretty decent at clearing a crowd of scabs. The Kinetic Rifle exists in 2 forms in PlayStation All-Stars. The first is a simple burst in front of Emmett, and the second is an airborne arc, which is typically quite weak but good at briefly immobilizing opponents in the air. In addition to these basic weapons, there were limited melee options in Starhawk. Well, I say options, but it was really just a single move where Emmett pulls a knife and waved it around in front of him. Sometimes this move was modified if an enemy was close enough, and instead Emmett would shank them, which is nice. The knife is 2 moves in PlayStation All-Stars, a small combo slash that references the original slash move from Starhawk, and a variation where Emmett waves the knife in the air like he just don't care, which can be used to catch aerial opponents. Emmett also has 2 more melee moves in PlayStation All-Stars, but these are original moves. However, they are based on the fact that Emmett's arm is infected with rift energy, and therefore is a little stronger than his other arm. Throughout Starhawk, we witness the power of this arm in occasional cutscenes, such as when he drained a scab's life force into his arm, or another scene where he punched the ground in frustration, causing it to crack. This latter scene seems to be the inspiration for these fist moves, especially the ground pound move, which seems like a direct lift. The other move seems to be just another redirection of the ground pound. Emmett's moveset uses a lot of directional variations, it seems. In addition to all of this, Emmett could call down more weapons fairly easily. Starhawk used a mechanic known as the build and battle system, which brought in RTS elements to a fairly standard third-person shooter. Emmett's technical assistant, Sydney Cutter, could be called upon throughout the game to literally drop stuff from the sky, aiding Emmett. One of the things he could be called on to drop was a supply bunker. Supply bunker had 2 uses. First of all, it acted as Emmett's own personal fort, giving him good cover. Secondly, it also came loaded with ammo and a couple of extra weapons. The first of these weapons was the Union shotgun, which was, well, a shotgun. This was a powerful close-range weapon that could take out enemies in a shot or 2. So basically like a shotgun from any shooter really, only just a bit greener and futuristic because space. The second weapon was the MAW rocket launcher, which was a futuristic rocket launcher that shot blasts of rift energy everywhere and was pretty much the best weapon in the game. These two weapons also drop from supply bunkers in PlayStation All-Stars, but things work a little differently this time. Instead of a mini fort like in Starhawk, the bunkers in All-Stars are tiny little weapon caches that hold an unlimited supply of one particular type of weapon. Also, Emmett now has to pick up the weapons instead of them just jumping into his pockets. The weapons work the same as the originals and use the same multi-directional move approach that the Revolver uses. They also allow Emmett to use two other weapons. Picking up the rocket launcher also gives Emmett a Tetranite Grenade. These were basically Starhawk's normal grenades, and you chuck them at enemies and they exploded. Do I really need to explain how a grenade works in a video game here? This was actually a fairly easily obtainable side weapon in Starhawk that would typically jump into your pocket whenever you picked up an ammo case. You can only carry 3 of these at a time, and they would detonate on impact or be on a time delay. Essentially, the All-Stars versions of these grenades are basically the same, only now they share an ammo count with the rocket launcher. And that's basically that. But these weren't your only explosive options in Starhawk. In certain missions you could pick up RSEX proximity mines, which were basically sticky bombs that you could use to set traps. You simply placed a mine in a prominent position, and then if an enemy went near it, the mine would explode and take out whoever went near it. It was a pretty handy tool, albeit one that was pretty rare. Picking up the shotgun in All-Stars also gives Emmett these mines, only they work a little differently this time. This time they can be stuck to opponents and also have a time delay detonation, so they're more like sticky grenades instead of mines this time. It's still a pretty useful move however, so you can't really complain about the changes. So back to that build and battle system. In order to make this work, Emmett required rift energy, which you should have realised by now is pretty important to the world of Starhawk. Typically in the single player campaign you would find this energy by defeating enemies or breaking open barrels, and you would use this energy anytime you call for something to be dropped from the sky. The other characters in the Starhawk universe mine rift energy using big hulking devices known as rift extractors. These things are built on top of rift energy wells, and they spend much of their time sitting around glowing and being attacked, requiring Emmett to protect them. You can also drop them from the sky, although this was typically only in plot-mandated situations, with Emmett dropping an extractor to replace a destroyed one. They didn't really have much purpose beyond that. They did feature in multiplayer, where they constantly dump out rift energy, and you could use this to replenish your stock. This rift extractor features in Emmett's moveset. He can call an itty little baby extractor from the sky, and it acts very much like the extractors from Starhawk's multiplayer, constantly dropping powerful energy for surrounding characters to pick up. This time, however, it drops AP orbs instead of rift energy because, well, rift energy doesn't exist in All-Stars. Obviously. Another highly useful item Emmett could call down in Starhawk was the turret. If you really want to set some traps, these babies were your best friends. Turrets would continuously fire at enemies that wandered near them, and it was great support for your firepower. The turrets could be destroyed, but it was pretty tricky for enemies to get close to them, so it often took a while for them to be taken out, which was pretty handy. The turrets are a part of Emmett's moveset in PlayStation All-Stars as well, and they act much the same, only they fire at a slower rate this time for balance reasons. They're also still destructible, but equally tricky to get close to. Now before we check the supers, let's take an incredibly quick look back at the moves we've seen so far.
Level 1!
Emmett's level 1 super is not from Starhawk. There we go, I said it. This move is original to PlayStation All-Stars. Of course, Emmett has 3 level 1 supers, one from the rifle, one from the shotgun, and another from the rocket launcher. The shotgun is a close-range blast, the rifle is a mid-range blast, and the rocket launcher is a long-range blast that can pass through opponents, and therefore why would you use any other version of the super? The inspiration for this simply seems to be rift energy again. Emmett seemingly harnesses the power of the rift energy in his arm to boost his shots, sort of like his punch moves. This isn't something he could do in Starhawk, however, but it seems like he might be able to do, I guess.
Level 2!
In one mission in Starhawk, Emmett needed to save the mayor of his former hometown from a prison in a refinery. To get into the refinery, he had to break through a reinforced hatch. So how did he do this?
Big hatch. Looks like the controls that popped this bad boy open are fried. Any ideas?
It's gonna take a serious bang to crack it. Let's see. All right. Buy me some time. I got one hell of an idea.
Cutter's idea was a gigantic bomb that he got Emmett to place on the hatch. However, it then had to be defended from invading scabs that began to attempt to destroy the bomb while it was charging up to be detonated. When it finally did detonate, it caused a huge explosion that took out the hatch, but also had a huge blast radius outwards too. This is Emmett's level 2, where he'll call the bomb down again onto the stage. Fortunately, this time it detonates instantly instead of on a timer, and therefore doesn't need to be defended. Like its inspiration, it also has a pretty large blast radius, making it a pretty effective super.
Level 3!
Since Starhawk was the spiritual successor to Warhawk, which was predominantly about flying aircraft, it stands to reason that Starhawk featured flying craft too. Enter the Hawk, Emmett's vehicle of choice. Hawks in Starhawk were transforming mechs that could walk about or fly around like jets and could naturally be loaded up with a variety of weapons. Emmett's is no exception to this, and many missions in Starhawk required Emmett to strap into a mech and fly about, battling enemy Hawks in aerial dogfights. Among the weapons in Emmett's Hawk were a basic machine gun, lasers and missiles, and an air mine. These were of varying degrees of usefulness. The machine gun was weak but unlimited, so it was useful for chasing down fleeing Hawks. The lasers and missiles were deadly but could be dodged, and the air mines were semi-useless since they just hung in the air rather obviously, requiring enemies to fly directly into them. On the ground, the Hawk also had the ability to stomp, stamping one of its legs into the ground causing a shockwave, which could be pretty useful when up against a group. Naturally, the Hawk is Emmett's level 3 in PlayStation All-Stars, where many of these weapons become attacks for him. The Hawk stomps around, so naturally it can perform its stomp move to gain kills, but also it can fire what appears to be a more powerful version of the machine gun. You can also drop air mines, but they're not particularly useful when most opponents are on the ground. And of course, the Hawk can switch to flight mode and fire missiles at the stage to gain kills as a finisher.
Let's hit 'em fast, hit 'em hard.
I'm through playing games.
Here comes the cavalry. Cluster of outcast Hawks heading right at you.
And that is Emmett Graves. Hope you've enjoyed this look into his moves, and next time we'll be visiting a more relaxed place for our next history adventure. Stay tuned.